Hey everyone. So I wanted to talk in this video about when to push and when to pull back because I've heard this question posed several times before, and I think it's a great question, and I want to do my best to address it based on what I know about these drugs and these conditions. So before I dive into the topic, I want to say that I know that I know that I filmed a goodbye video a month ago, and I want to address why I'm filming content again. So basically, what I was finding was that I would do a few months of coaching and things would go well, but I would become overwhelmed because being in this space and talking one-on-one, although it's very rewarding in some ways, it also is very difficult and very heavy. And because of everything else I have going on in my life, it would start to wear me down. And I would find myself wanting to stop. And I would tell myself, okay, well, just take a break. Like just close your calendar for a month or two, take a break. But I always had such a hard time doing that because there's so many people in this community that need and want regular support. And that's totally fair. And I didn't want to be the one who was consistently coaching people regularly, say every week or a couple of times a week or every other week, and then taking off for a month or two. Maybe that would be a better option than me quitting altogether. But I just found that me not being able to be totally consistent all the time was not fair to people. And it wasn't fair to myself to continue to push through when I knew I needed a break. So I just could never reconcile it in my mind how to do that, and maintain good rapport with clients, which I think I had really great rapport with my clients, but I really struggled with that. It was this constant internal battle between wanting to provide a lot of support consistently and doing so, and then needing to pull back. And like I said, I could never quite reconcile it. So I thought, well, it's best for me to just leave altogether. But on the flip side, I actually really, really like filming content. And I feel like I've gained so much knowledge about these drugs over the past 7 years. And I have been asked by people since announcing that I was quitting coaching to continue to produce content because those people had expressed that they found it valuable. And I thought, okay, well, this can be my way to continue to give back to the community. And also when I was coaching, it was getting really hard to put up boundaries in the sense that I know in between calls, people would want to reach out and ask questions. And I always felt like I needed to respond and all of that. There was so many people reaching out to me, and I realized the needs are really great, but I just couldn't balance it all. So that's why I've been filming content lately, and I still have great friends from the community, and we'll have conversations every once in a while, and things get brought up, and then I think, hey, I should make a video about that. So here I am. So the question of, or the topic of, when should I push and when should I pull back? And it's actually kind of a tough question to answer, but I've sort of made peace with it in my own mind. And here's my perception of this. So on the one hand, you have, at least in my experience, people in the drug community that say, don't do A, B, or C because it's too stimulating. It's going to stimulate the nervous system, and this is bad. This is always bad. And then you have sort of the flip side of, if you look at it from a holistic approach or a mind-body or even just a fear response approach, and they say more, you don't want to avoid things because then you're teaching your brain, your subconscious mind, your mind, whatever, that it's dangerous. So your brain is flagging it as dangerous. So that's going to add to the fear response. So there's sort of two flip sides to that. And people have asked me this question: how do you know when to push and how do you know when to pull back? So my answer to this is, and was as a coach, when you are in a wave, it's not probably the best time to be pushing. Now, does this mean that I think you should just hide in a dark room forever? No, I don't think that. I think you should still maybe push the envelope a little tiny bit when you're in a wave, or just continue to maybe do a little tiny bit more than you did in the last wave. But I think the windows are really the windows of opportunity to start doing things that scare you more. So there's another fine line here. So someone will bring up to me caffeine. Should I drink caffeine? And if you look at it from a physiological standpoint, caffeine is a stimulant. So you'd think, okay, someone who has an overloaded nervous system, it wouldn't really be smart to add caffeine into the mix. But then some people will say, well, caffeine or coffee or soda or whatever really added to my quality of life. It was just something small every day that I really enjoyed and I really miss it. So when should I start trying to incorporate that back into my life? And some people will choose to avoid that indefinitely, and that's fine. But for the people who it's important to them to start adding these little things that brought them joy in the past, when do you start doing that? So I think windows are a great time to do that. And the timeline of this is going to be different for everybody. Some people are going to want to try this earlier on, not super early on. I don't recommend doing it in acute withdrawal, but as time goes on, and that's something that's important to you, I think windows are a good time to sort of test that out. Because again, if you're looking at it from a mind-body approach, you don't want to start flagging things as good or bad, or something that is not generally really dangerous. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily alcohol or psychiatric drugs, for sure not. And I'm not talking about sort of hardcore things. I'm just talking about things that might be sort of on the line where you're like, is this good for me or is this bad? And for someone with a sort of compromised nervous system, where is the line? And so something like caffeine, or it could be even exercise. If you're someone who has post-exertional malaise, which I had for years, when do you start pushing that and sort of showing your body that this is okay? So if you look in the chronic fatigue syndrome community, which I've mentioned in other videos, is eerily similar to withdrawal. And it's not just about fatigue. A lot of those people have severe anxiety. They have internal vibrations. They have head pressure. They have a lot of the things that people in this community have. And there's something in that community known as pacing, which I think what I'm talking about would fall in line with that. How do you sort of continue to stretch or push the envelope to get that stamina back, to get that how do you word it? I guess there's a different, like that stress threshold back. How do you get that resiliency back in the nervous system? And I think pacing, or starting to sort of push, or maybe I'm wrong about the way that they are defining pacing, but this is how I understand it, is you're starting to sort of push and then you withdraw again, and you push and you withdraw, and you kind of like extend that all the time. And windows, a lot of people are feeling more resilient, even if it's a brief amount of time, or some people are getting day-long windows or week-long windows, but you tend to have more resilience in the nervous system. So I think those are good times. You're not pushing too hard. So in the chronic fatigue groups, they'll say you're pacing, you're pushing, but you're not going to the point of, you're going to crash. So we're just stretching, we're pushing the envelope a little bit, and we're trying to build that resiliency back. So I think it's a good time to do that. And so exercise could be a great example of this. A lot of people find that they're sensitive to cardio, to going to the gym, anything with a certain level of exertion. They'll find that they'll crash afterwards, whether their symptoms are more on the fatigue end or whether their symptoms are more on the hyperexcitable end. They will get an uptick in symptoms. Even with tinnitus, it can flare up and get worse after you've exerted yourself more than usual. But I do think, at least for myself, because exercise was such a huge part of my quality of life before this happened to me, I had to grieve not exercising. It was that important to me, and I just could not do it in either of my withdrawals. To a certain point, I just would get so sick afterwards. In my first withdrawal, I would get literally ill, and in my second withdrawal, I would just get such an uptick in symptoms, I couldn't stand it. But it was important to me to at least one day be able to build that back into my life. And so for me, it's been that pacing. I used to work out for an hour straight, or 45 minutes straight, pretty hardcore. And it was, for me, starting back, it was walking. I started walking 15 minutes a day, half an hour, and I slowly built up to, now I walk between an hour and an hour and a half a day. But that wasn't enough for me because I really like the runner's high. I like the endorphins. I like the power workouts. And so to build, I've only recently started doing that again. And I literally started out with 5 to 10 minutes. And I did that consistently day in and day out. And it was sort of like, okay, I've been off the drugs for almost 4 years. And it's time. Like, I really want to start working out again. And so I kind of had the mindset of, even if this causes an uptick in symptoms, it's not like I've pushed myself for an hour. I've only pushed myself for 5 to 10 minutes. But up to this point, that would cause an uptick in symptoms. But I was just like, I'm going to push through that wall. I'm far enough off. I've got to start because I can't keep going without exercise in my life. I just love it that much. And it helps with my diabetes. It helps with everything. So starting with 5 to 10 minutes and doing that consistently for a week or 2 weeks, and then upping it to 15 minutes. And it's a pacing thing. And, I think if you're in a pretty bad wave, that is not the time to test out those types of things. Even if there's something that is not generally seen as dangerous or seen as living on the edge, to a regular person. But in this situation, those are things that can put people into waves. Things like caffeine and things like exercise. There's other examples, but those are two that were really pertinent for me. And so I'm just using those as an example. But it could be anything that you previously enjoyed. That's not like a dangerous thing, but something that you feel like you just cannot do anymore. And I think once you start getting windows, that's the time to test the waters. You're not pushing so hard that you crash, because a lot of people tend to do that. And I have done that before as well. It's like you feel so bad for so long, and then you get a window and you want to do everything. But usually, a lot of times that will end in a crash, and people are like, why did I do that? And then they're in the wave for 3 weeks or whatever. And so I think the pacing, just like in the chronic fatigue groups, is really good in this as well, and something that's wise. And it kind of hits two birds with one stone. The one where you are building those back into your life to teach the brain and nervous system that these things are safe, and I'm going to build them back into my life. So from a mind-body perspective and a withdrawal perspective of, this is stimulating to the nervous system, but I need to build that resiliency back up. I want to build that resiliency back up because I think, you normally, before this happens to you, you have this wide range of stress threshold. So you're here and your tolerance of stress is like up here. And so you have this bandwidth to work with. And then when you're in withdrawal, you have this tiny bandwidth. So you're just kind of pinging back and forth. And it takes just a little tiny bit to put you over back into symptoms. And so you want to widen that gap. And that will happen over time. But I think that building these things back into your life, pacing through them, and teaching that safety that, oh, you know what, these things actually aren't dangerous, even if my body has perceived it that way and caused upticks in symptoms. And I had that tiny little bandwidth to work with. So before, when I was trying it, it wasn't working. It was spilling me into a setback or a wave every time. And so, but the farther you get off and you start getting typically a little bit longer or clearer windows, that's really when you can build that back up. But you still need to pace yourself. That's what I have seen to be the best approach for people. And yeah, I guess that's what I would tell someone who asks me, when do you push and when do you pull back? And two, I've mentioned this before in videos, and I used to refer to it as nurturing, and I think I called it nurturing and stretching, something like that. And it's the same type of thing. And I labeled it that and talked about it in those terms, but I never really defined that I can remember. And so that's just the way that I sort of put parameters around it. And I've noticed that this has been fairly effective for people in this community from my experience. So anyway, just wanted to explain why I've been making content again, and I guess answer that question that's come up in coaching calls before, and actually recently in a conversation with a friend. So let me know your thoughts on that, and if it's been effective for you, or if you feel like you're at a place where, I'm getting patterns of windows now, and I'm getting really nice windows, but what do I do in those windows? And that, that's a fair question. And intuitively, and sort of a knee-jerk reaction is for people to just do everything, and then they kick themselves when they go into a wave. So I think this, where you're trying a little bit, but then you're kind of pulling back and you're building on itself, and you kind of get momentum, I think, that way as well. So let me know your thoughts on that. It's not a perfect science by any means. It's different for different people, how far you can push. And a lot of factors, I think, go into that. But that's a good general rule in my experience. So I hope you guys are doing well and that you have a good weekend, and I'll see you next time. Bye.